In a previous video, I've described the journey that the Blessed Virgin Mary has taken with Saint Joseph from Nazareth to Jerusalem. And then in another video subsequent to that, where Saint Joseph leaves the Blessed Virgin Mary in the care of an old man who will take a part of the way on the journey from Jerusalem to the home of Saint Elizabeth and Saint Zacharias. Now I'm going to read the vision that follows that vision that's given to Maria Valtorta on the 1st of April 1944, which is chapter 21 of the first volume of the poem of the Man God. Maria Valtorta begins. I'm now in a mountainous place. They are not high mountains, neither are they just hills. There are ridges and creeks, as we see in our Apennines in Tuscany and Umbria. The vegetation is thick and beautiful, and there is plenty of fresh water that keeps the pastures green and the orchards fruitful. Apple and fig trees are mostly cultivated in the orchards, and grapes near the houses. It must be springtime, because the grapes are rather big, about the size of vetch grains, and the apple blossoms have already sprung, and they look like so many little green pellets. On top of the fig branches, the first fruits can be seen, still in the embryo stage, but already well formed. The meadows are real, soft, multicoloured carpets. Sheep are grazing or resting on them, and they look like white spots on the emerald of the grass. Mary, on her donkey, is climbing up a rather well-kept road, probably the main road. She is climbing because the village is higher up and it looks quite tidy. My internal warner says to me, this place is Hebron. You spoke to me of Montana. I cannot help it, it is indicated to me with this name. I do not know whether Hebron is the whole area or only the village. That is what I hear, and that is what I say. Just pause for a moment. She refers to her internal warner. This individual, angel perhaps, maybe the Holy Spirit himself, is the one that gives her information. So for example, when she sees Jesus in the temple amongst the doctors of the law, she sees two men around each of whom are a set of other individuals. These two men are the leaders of these different groups, and she's told that these are Shammai and Hillel, the great rabbis of ancient Israel in the 1st century AD. And there's other information that she gets from her internal warner, otherwise she wouldn't know certain things. Generally, though, she gets information from listening to conversations that pass between people. So she hears names that way. But I shouldn't say just generally, because the internal warner, I think, is giving her information a lot of the time as well. So to resume. Mary is now entering the village. It is evening. Some women on their doorsteps watch the arrival of the stranger and gossip with one another. Their eyes follow her, and they are not happy until they see her stop in front of one of the prettiest houses in the centre of the village, with a kitchen garden in the front and rear, and a well-cultivated orchard around it. The orchard continues into a large meadow that rises and slopes according to the sinuosity of the mountain, and ends in a wood of tall trees, beyond which I do not know what there is. The whole place is surrounded by a hedge of blackberries or wild roses. I cannot tell exactly which, because if you remember, the flowers and leaves of these two thorny hedges are very much alike, and until their branches bear fruit, it is easy to confuse them. In front of the house, that is, on the side that skirts the village, the place is enclosed by a small, low, white wall, on top of which There are rows of rose bushes, at present without flowers, but already full of buds. In the centre, there is an iron gate. It is easily understood that it is the house of a notable of the village, or of a well-to-do family, because everything shows comfort and great order, if not riches and pomp. Mary gets off the donkey and goes to the gate. She looks through the iron bars, but does not see anyone. She endeavours then to make herself heard. A little old woman, who, more curious than the others, has followed her, shows her a strange gadget that is used as a bell. It consists of two pieces of metal balanced on a kind of yoke, at the end of which there is a rope. When the rope is pulled, the two metal pieces strike each other and give the sound of a bell or gong. Mary pulls the rope, but so gently that there is only a faint tinkling which no one hears. Then the little old woman, whose face is all nose and slipper chin, and whose tongue is worth 10 put together, gets hold of the rope and pulls it several times with all her might. She makes enough noise to raise a dead man. That's how you do it, woman. Otherwise, how can they hear you? You know Elizabeth is old, and Zacharias also is old. Now he's also dumb, as well as deaf. Also, the two servants are old, don't you know? Have you ever been here before? Don't you know Zacharias? Are you? Mary is rescued from the deluge of information and questions by a little old man who suddenly appears panting. He must be a gardener or a farmer, for he is holding a hoe in his hand, and there's a pruning knife tied to his belt. He opens the gate, and Mary enters, thanking the little old woman, but leaving her fairly recent question unanswered. What a disappointment for the curious soul. As soon as she's inside, Mary says, "I am Mary of Joachim and Anne from Nazareth. I am your master's cousin." The man bows down and welcomes her. He then calls out in a loud voice, "Sarah, Sarah!" He opens the gate again to let in the donkey that had been left outside. Mary, in fact, to get rid of the persistent little woman, had slipped inside very quickly, and the gardener just as quickly had closed the gate in the face of the gossip. And while taking the donkey in, he exclaims, "Oh, what a great happiness, and what an upheaval to this household! Heaven has granted a child to the barren one. May the Most High be blessed." But 7 months ago, Zacharias came back dumb from Jerusalem. He now makes himself understood by gestures or by writing. Perhaps you already know. My landlady has longed so much for you in this joy and in this travail. She always spoke to Sarah about you, and she would say, "If only I had little Mary with me. I wish she were still in the temple. I would send Zacharias to fetch her." But now the Lord wanted her married to Joseph of Nazareth. She's the only one who can comfort me in my pain and help me to pray to God, because she is so good. And they all miss her in the temple. On the last feast day, the last time I went to Jerusalem with Zacharias to thank the Lord for the child he's given me, her teacher said to me, "The temple seems to be without the cherubim of the glory since Mary's voice is no longer heard inside the walls." He then shouts again, "Sarah, Sarah!" My wife is a little deaf, but come please, I'll show you the way. Instead of Sarah, a fairly old woman appears at the top of the staircase on one side of the house. Her face is all wrinkles, and her hair is very grey. It must have been very black at one time, because her eyelashes and eyebrows are still very dark, and also, from the colour of her face, one can tell that she was swarthy. Her present, very obvious pregnant condition is a strange contradiction to her evident old age. notwithstanding her wide and loose dress. She looks down, shading her eyes with her hand. As soon as she recognizes Mary, she raises her arms to the sky and utters an "oh" of joy and surprise. She then rushes as fast as she can towards Mary. Also Mary, who always moves very quietly, now runs as swift as a little deer and reaches the foot of the staircase at the same time as Elizabeth. And she embraces, with great affection, her cousin who is crying with joy at seeing her. They remain embraced for an instant, and then Elizabeth detaches herself, exclaiming, "Ah!" an exclamation of mingled joy and sorrow, and she places her hands on her enlarged abdomen. She bows her face and turns red and pale, alternately. Mary and the servant hold out their hands to support her, because she staggers as if she were unwell. But Elizabeth, after a moment of concentration, lifts her face, which is now so bright that she looks much younger. She then looks at Mary with evident veneration, as if she sees an angel. She bows in a deep salutation, exclaiming, "You are blessed amongst all women. Blessed is the fruit of your womb." She says exactly that, two clearly separate sentences. "How did I deserve that the mother of my Lord should come to me, your servant?" There, at the sound of your voice, the child leapt out of joy in my womb. And when I embraced you, the Spirit of the Lord whispered deepest truths to my heart. You are blessed, because you believed that it was possible for God also what does not appear possible to the human mind. You are blessed, because by your faith you will accomplish the things the Lord predicted to you, and the prophets foretold it for our times. You are blessed for the salvation you've brought to the house of Jacob. You are blessed for the holiness you've brought to my son, whom I feel leaping with joy like a happy little kid in my womb, because he feels free from the burden of guilt, and is called to be the predecessor, sanctified before redemption by the Holy One who is growing within you. Just pause for a moment there. The Catholic Church has long had a teaching, a tradition that St. John the Baptist was sanctified in the womb of St. Elizabeth when the Blessed Virgin Mary attended St. Elizabeth's house. Mary is the Immaculate Conception, but John the Baptist, that is, St. John the Baptist, is made free from original sin in the womb. We, ordinary mortals, are made free of original sin at our baptism, ideally when we are babies, but if we're converts, then later. So St. John the Baptist is, one might say, pre-sanctified, and St. Elizabeth here is attesting to that, and you'll note that she's saying that she learnt about Mary and what is in her womb from the Spirit of the Lord, when she embraced the Blessed Virgin. At that moment, the Spirit of the Lord whispered deepest truths to my heart. So St. Elizabeth became a prophetess at that point, for that moment. Continuing now. Mary, with two tears that run down like two pearls from her sparkling eyes to her smiling lips, with her face raised to heaven and also her arms raised up in the attitude that her Jesus will take so often, exclaims, "My soul proclaims the greatness of the Lord." And she continues the canticle as it has been handed down to us. At the end, at the verse, "He has come to the help of Israel, his servant," etc., she puts her hands on her breast, kneels down, stooping to the ground, adoring God. The servant, who quite wisely had disappeared when he realised that Elizabeth was not really physically unwell, on the contrary, she was confiding her thoughts to Mary, is now coming back from the orchard with a solemn old man whose hair and beard are completely white, and who greets Mary from a distance with great gestures and loud guttural sounds. Zacharias is arriving, says Elizabeth, touching the shoulder of Mary, engrossed in prayer. My Zacharias is dumb. God has punished him because he did not believe. I will tell you later. But now, I hope that God will forgive him, because you've come, you, full of grace. Mary rises and goes to meet Zacharias. She stoops to the ground in front of him, kissing the hem of his white robe that reaches down to the ground. It is a very wide robe, held tight to the waist by a large embroidered braid. Once again, I'll stop for a moment. There we have the Blessed Virgin, to whom Gabriel made the most earth-shattering announcement in the entirety of the history of the human race. She's bearing God in her womb, and she's now bowing to Zacharias. It says she kisses the hem of his white robe. Notice she didn't do that with Elizabeth, and I think it's because, as Mary says elsewhere, that no matter how holy you are, you must still see yourself as nothing in the sight of God. And so Mary and Joseph, as you know from my previous video, they went to the temple to pray as soon as they arrived in Jerusalem, and they tied the donkeys up. And here we have Zacharias, who's a representative of the temple because he's a priest of God. Now, the Catholic priesthood is far greater than the priesthood that Zacharias represented. But it's just worth not just skipping over without noticing, but pausing to reflect that the Blessed Virgin kisses the hem of Zacharias. And this is even after Saint Elizabeth has told her that God has punished Zacharias for his sin. Mary doesn't necessarily know why that happened yet. It looks like she doesn't know at all, and there's no indication prior to this in the previous visions that St. Joseph had told her about Zacharias, because otherwise Mary would not have had to tell St. Joseph that Elizabeth is pregnant. Nonetheless, we have a sinful Zacharias before whom the Blessed Virgin Mary bends down and kisses the hem of his robe. And that's a lesson for us Catholics to, obviously we don't bend down and kiss the hems of the soutane of our Catholic priests, if the priesthood wears that venerable garment. But you can see why there's a long-standing tradition of kissing the priest's hand, of kissing the ring of the bishop. It's not just some kind of Catholic little odd bit of behaviour, which belongs to the pre-modern period, and we're enlightened now and we're a people of equals. And so we shouldn't venerate our priests in this way. No. The Blessed Virgin Mary is an example. And if I just did a single video on that small paragraph about what that tells us about how our attitude should be to our priests. And don't forget, as I said, to repeat, Zacharias was a sinner as the Blessed Virgin had been told by Elizabeth. This was a sin graver than most ordinary sins that priests can commit, because it caused the angel Gabriel to stop up Zacharias' mouth. So it's a really serious sin that Zacharias had committed. So though Catholic priests may commit serious sins, we still have to recognise they are priests, and they deserve our respect as priests. They may need, if they go stealing or whatever it is, need to be punished by the secular authorities, but nonetheless they are priests. I think though that tussle between church and state, which is very much exemplified in one of our national heroes, St. Thomas of Becket, that the church's ministers are not to be touched by the king's ministers. That tussle was there because we know there's a special role that our priests have, and that it's not, one doesn't treat a priest when he commits crimes in the same way you treat a secular person. That horrifies the worldly, the atheists, the agnostics, the non-Catholics. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter to us Catholics what shocks them. Their time is coming to an end. It just so obviously is when you look at the way the world is going. But that tussle between church and state, and the church is the insistence of its rights, that it would punish the priests. And it should punish them severely when they commit crimes, but it's the church that should do it. Ideally not the secular authority, but because the church does not have that power in modern societies, the secular authorities has to do that. But it's not actually ideal. It's not the best way. It's not satisfactory. But then history moves in ways which are not always satisfactory to the church. That's been the way it has been from the beginning. We must accept that. But I think I'd better stop this now because we're going to lose the thread of this account. The Blessed Virgin Mary, just to recap, has encountered Saint Zacharias and has shown her great respect for his priesthood. Zacharias welcomes Mary by gestures, and they both move towards Elizabeth. They all enter a room on the ground floor. It is a wide room, tastefully arranged, where they make Mary sit down and they offer her some new milk, there is still foam on it, and some small cakes. Elizabeth gives some orders to the maidservant, who has appeared at last, her hands still covered with flour, and her hair whiter than usual because of the flour dust on it. Perhaps she was baking bread. She gives orders also to the male servant, whose name I hear is Samuel, and tells him to take Mary's trunk to a room which she indicates to him. She thus fulfills her duties of a landlady towards her guest. In the meantime, Mary is replying to the questions Zacharias is asking her, writing them on a wax tablet with a stylus. From her answer, I understand that he's asking her about Joseph and her married life with him. I also understand that Zacharias has been denied all supernatural light about Mary's state and her condition of mother of the Messiah. Elizabeth goes near her husband and, laying her hand on his shoulder in a loving attitude, as if she were caressing him chastely, she says to him, "Also Mary is a mother. Rejoice over her happiness." But she does not say anything else. She looks at Mary, and Mary looks at her, but does not encourage her to say more. And Elizabeth keeps silent. A sweet, very sweet vision. It obliterates the horror of the sight of Judas's suicide. Just pause for one moment. You might find that a bit of a shock. What on earth is she bringing Judas's suicide into this? I can only surmise, without going through the book and looking at the dates, I can only surmise that the Blessed Virgin had the vision of Judas's suicide shortly before this series of visions concerning the Annunciation and the journey to Elizabeth's house. And so it's still vividly in Maria Valtorta's mind. Continuing. And this is, by the way, continuing, there's a further reference to a vision that Maria Valtorta had, which is after the death of Jesus on the cross, which she'll now refer to, and again, which predates this vision of the visitation to St. Elizabeth. Last night, before falling asleep, I saw Mary crying, bent over the unction stone on the dead body of our Redeemer. The unction stone, by the way, is the stone in the tomb on which the body of Jesus lay when he died and was going to be enclosed in Joseph of Arimathea's tomb. Continuing. She was on his right-hand side, with her back to the opening of the sepulchre grotto. The torches lit up her face, so that I could see her poor face ravaged by sorrow and washed by tears. She would take Jesus' hand, caress it, warm it against her cheeks, kiss it, stretch its fingers out, kiss them one by one, those poor, motionless fingers. Then she would caress his face, would bend down to kiss his open mouth, his half-open eyes, his wounded forehead. The reddish light of the torches made the wounds of the tortured body appear more real, and rendered the cruelty of his torture and the realism of his death more true and real. And I remained in contemplation until my mind was clear. When I came out of my supper, I prayed and I laid down to go to sleep. Then the above vision began. But Mother said to me, "Don't move, just look. You will write it tomorrow." In my sleep, I dreamt it all over again. When I woke up at 6:30, I saw what I had already seen, both when I was awake and in my sleep. And I wrote while I was seeing. Then you came and I asked you if I could add the following. They are various sketches of Mary's stay in Zacharias' house. And that's the end of the chapter. But just that brief segment of the vision of the Blessed Virgin Mary in the sepulchre with Jesus' body. At some stage I will recount the vision, the complete vision of that. But Mary was absolutely frantic at that time. Of course, none of the evangelists tell us about this, but she was absolutely frantic. And obviously we can deduce that she must have been there because she's at the foot of the cross, as St. John tells us. So she wouldn't stay there or go back to the supper room while Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus would take the body to the Joseph of Arimathea's tomb. That would be absurd. No, she would go with the body. She would not be left alone without it. She would not leave her Jesus alone while she's utterly frantic in the tomb. I won't go into detail about that. But what I wanted to say was that in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, it is said there is the unction stone that Jesus' body was laid on. And some of you and I have been to Jerusalem, into the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and been in that small area where is the stone on which our Lord was laid. There's been work done on what is called the edicula, which surrounds it. I think Great Britain put up the edicula because there was a problem with the structure that was unstable. It was some ugly edifice, but it did its job. I mean, holding the shrine in place back in the early 20th century, I think. But x-rays have been done on that to see inside the structure of the edicula. And it's been found that indeed there are two sides of a rocky cave. Not the top, that's gone, but two sides. And so what we're seeing in this vision, if we were in that Church of the Holy Sepulchre, we are at the place where the Blessed Virgin Mary was with the dead body of our Lord Jesus 2,000 years ago. One might say, well, maybe that rock, that cave, is not really the place of Jesus' burial. It's some other cave. One can say that, but it seems extremely unlikely. Tradition led the early Christians to see this as a place where Jesus is buried, and now we know, stripping away via x-rays all the church structures that have been built over it, we see there's a cave there. And if church tradition has told us that our ancestors have handed down over the centuries the belief that this was where Jesus was buried, it seems pretty certain that it really was where he was buried. And so with that, I'll conclude this video.